On today's episode of Interview with a Pro, I sit down with the one and only Raphael Rau, otherwise known as Silverwing. He's an amazing 3D artist with over 20 years of experience specialising in hyper-real, physically accurate rendering, and if you've ever tried to sit down and learn Octane, I guarantee you have watched or learned something from his incredible Quickish tips on his YouTube channel that he updates weekly. To sit down with someone who's personally taught me so much was an absolute honour, and in our conversation we understand why he loves sharing his knowledge, his love for Octane, a sneak peek at the Octane cheat sheet that I've been currently working on for you, and what Cinema4D 2030 might look like in the future. We tried to pack as much knowledge into one video as possible, so I really hope you enjoy our conversation. Please make sure to subscribe for more interviews along the way, and without further ado, here's Raphael Rau.
Yeah, so my name is Raphael Rau, as you just said, and I am known as Silverwing in the interwebs. So what I do is I concentrated very much the last couple of... No, it's only 1 decade or 1.5 decades. So I basically do photorealistic rendering and specialized in that. So photorealistic, physical, plausible shaders and materials and so on. So that's what I do. I worked on several bigger production, as for example Halo Spartan Ops, and was in Scotland visiting Access Studios there, but also for a sponsor, if you know them. So they do a lot of advertising work. What else is there to say? Well, maybe I should mention that I also do tutorials about mostly Octane, but in general about 3D stuff. Yeah, so if you're interested in learning 3D, you can go over to my channel. A bit of a commercial here.
I know, please, because I think I was just saying this as we were getting onto the call, where I've come into this what I think very late in terms of the 3D learning journey. And I feel like the speed in which I've been able to learn from channels like yours is vastly, vastly quicker than anything else I've done. And I kind of wanted to start because I wanted to get a bit of an understanding as to where does your passion for sharing this knowledge come from?
That's a good question. So let's see if I can answer that. First of all, like I am that next sentences might make me sound very old, but I come from a time where there wasn't a lot of knowledge around, so I predate the internet in that I'm doing 3D. I was setting up Cinema4D before there was websites and stuff like that available in Germany. The internet is like an American way that's older, but when I got into 3D, there was nothing to look up in the internet. So you had the handbook or the manual, as it's called, and nothing else. So, So I really was like, what do I say? How do I say that? I was dependent on the community a lot, so we shared knowledge quite often and between each other, so I think that stuck with me, and so I just got used to just providing knowledge without hesitation. So if someone asks me something, I do not think, is it good to share this? Is it like, does that mean that later, like I do also trainings and stuff like that, so if I share too much, then people won't book trainings with me because they already know everything. So I do not think about that. I just share. I think, okay, if I'm in the situation that people already know the stuff, it throws me into one corner, so I have to learn new stuff, and this is only a good thing.
Absolutely,
so yeah, let's see how this goes.
No, because it's great, because there's something about the 3D learning journey which is completely unique to any other type of industry, whether it might be photography or whether there might be motion, even just normal 2D motion design in After Effects. There are so many things within 3D that you have to compartmentalize, understand, and apply. And I just wanted to ask if you had that same issue.
Well, yeah, still, like, when I started, I didn't even know what I was doing. I was just playing around, basically, in the software and seeing what it could do. I didn't even know what, like, the term 3D meant. It was, like, I was thinking that back in the day when you had some 3D movies in the terms of CGI, for example, Tron, the old one, the one from the 80s, so I thought they had very special computers and like very specialized software to do those effects. I wasn't aware that I had the same access to the same software. Not saying that this was made with Cinema4D, but I had access to the same software that sort of they were using, so I could have made stuff like that. But when I did start to realize that the software isn't the thing that's holding me back, but my knowledge about all of the possibilities, so I then got into different segments of it. And luckily for me back then, like nowadays you're very overwhelmed with what you could do. Like you can get an expert at pyro simulation. You can do water simulations. You can do like twisty noodle stuff all your life, and you never run out of twisty noodles to do. So, but yeah, in general, there's like a lot of things that that stuck to the experience or to the whole knowledge base of 3D while it was growing. So when I started, there wasn't a lot to it. So we had cameras, we had lights, we had a little bit of materials. This is all like way back in version like Cinema4D R7, for example. And it was very rudimentary back then. So when I started, I I wasn't overwhelmed with stuff that much. I knew that I needed to learn how to animate a camera, for example. So I did like basic logo animations and tried to get to the same level that Hollywood movie intros were done and stuff like that. So yeah, sorry, I tend to forget questions if I'm rambling on for too long, so you always have to remind me.
And so I guess the almost the tools themselves, I guess from Cinema4D, the very first one, to what they are now, but bearing the fact that they also changed their UI, which I think it shifted everyone
yeah
a couple of degrees, because
I'm still in the process of learning.
Same, I think, because I'm so I'm holding on to some of the old like CGraph tutorials from like 2012 2013 where I'm like, oh, these are really good, and I look at them and go, I have no idea what I'm looking at because the UI has completely changed and I don't know what these buttons mean anymore.
The really interesting thing is that if you open Cinema4D R, I think I have a copy of R4 on my computer still. So if you open that, the interface looks the same as R22, I think was the last one that used the old interface. And then like they changed it, and like it never changed before. So it was like very radical to me, because my whole life I was working with the software and I knew how to find stuff because everything never changed. So it like if you wanted to do like invert your normals, there were like 3 different menus where you could do that or something like that, and I knew them by heart. Now I'm lost all the time.
Is that at about 15 or 20 minutes to your day, just trying to figure out where stuff is? What about, I guess it's
if not more.
Yes.
But yeah, I hope it gets faster again. If I'm a very slow learner when it comes to your eyes, I guess. or I'm so reliant on how like muscle memory. So I got really thrown off when they changed the UIs because they not only changed the position of the menus but also the symbols. So there was like it was broken twice. So you couldn't rely on your muscle memory to find the location. You couldn't even rely on your eyes to see the symbol you were searching for, because that also like was changed.
Wow.
Yeah, sorry, like we're getting off topic already.
No, that's the whole point. It is the whole point, because no, I think I came at this maybe at a fortunate time when I only had like R25 was potentially the first version of Cinema4D I had. So when it came along, I was like, oh, they've just changed it a little bit. It hasn't really made that much of an impact on me because I'm still learning. Where for you, it's like quite a categorical. Yeah. Your whole world perspective has changed on this one piece of software.
Sort of, yes.
No, that's great, and I guess
I was rather mad with them.
Because my next question is, we spend so long in these types of softwares, and the question that I had previously was more, how did you find your route towards the hyper-physical, hyper-realistic types of material creation? Because I understand that's what the power of Octane is, but I think I do have a lot of people that I speak to it's their first time coming into 3D as well, and a lot of the times they're asking me, what's the point on using Octane, or what's the point on using a third-party renderer? And I just tell them it's an unbiased render engine, because that's what I know to be true. But it would be great to actually understand maybe a little bit behind the render engine, and then how you then were able to take that into your workflow.
Yeah, so my history goes way back. Like I started with obviously the Cinema4D renderer, and then the next renderer I used, very similar to what Cornelius told you, was V-Ray. So V-Ray came out, and like it was a little bit more on the photorealistic side, but still had a lot of like you could not like. I think Octane is like point and shoot mostly, so you can just set up very quickly. And with V-Ray, you had to bake caches, like for GI, for example, you had to bake an irradiance map and a light cache and stuff like that. So it was like more tedious, but it was faster than Cinema4D's internal renderer. So I stuck with that until Octane came about. And I actually switched to Octane standalone. Back then there was no Cinema4D plugin.
Interesting.
So the plugin was developed later. So when I did my first Octane renders, they were made inside of the standalone. So I had to export I was still modeling and stuff in Cinema4D, but I then exported OBJs to the standalone and then did the shading there. And back then also you couldn't manipulate geometry inside of the standalone. So when you would wanted another light position, lights were just illuminated planes back then. So there was no light object. It was just a rectangle polygon with a light material on it. You can still do that, but nowadays it's like gotten a little bit more professional. So if I wanted to change the light position, I would re-export everything from Cinema4D, like tweak the position of the plane and then re-export and then see what it looked like in Octane in the standalone. But it was so fast compared to everything else that it made sense. So like in V-Ray, you would wait 5 minutes for a render. You just had a very tiny render region, and you had everything prepared. You had your lights on, you had your subdivisions on the biggest level, then you pressed render, and then it took like multiple pre-passes for example, subsurface scattering and then global illumination, and then it would start render, and it would take forever till you saw the small portion of your frame, and then from there you had to extrapolate what the whole image would look like, and then whether it was worth to update your HDRI to rotate it another 5 degrees and see if that would look better or not, and then go through the same process all over again. So when Octane came about, you could just put your scene, like, it was almost instant. It was like you could hit render, and in 10 seconds you could see what you was doing. I'm not sure anymore if you could rotate an HDRI, but I think you could. So, like, if you had light sources, you would have to re-export that. But for HDRIs, I think you could rotate them in these standalone. So that was a huge deal back then. It's like really interesting how the stuff that everyday people nowadays use was so very revolutionary.
I don't realize how privileged I am being able to just click on rotate on my HDRI tag. You know, like, that's something that I could just do and have lots of fun with. But back then it sounds like it was a much more difficult process.
Back then in V-Ray, what I usually would do is overnight I would render a 360 degrees animation, so very low resolution, where the HDRI just rotated linearly in one circle. So and the next day I was looking at the animation and then decided at what angle the HDRI would look best in the scene. Stuff like that was done all the time.
just to get just to have an understanding of what your renders might look like, as opposed to it being real time, I'm assuming.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, it's like, where would the shadows fall? What reflections or refractions are the best in what position of the HDRI and stuff like that. So it was very rudimentary. Like, you wanted to be sure you had the best angle for the HDRI for the scene. Nowadays, you just rotate it around and wait for a couple of seconds.
I guess my appreciation I absolutely love the photographic quality of Octane. I think that's what, if it wasn't for something like this, I don't think 3D would be as interesting to me, just because it doesn't feel like I can just take a photo.
It was way more technical back then.
Yeah, where now it's like, okay, it's still, you know, I feel like it's so much easier.
Sure, if you go in depth, you can go deep, of course.
Yes, and I do plan on asking you some very in-depth questions. I might not know what I'm talking about, but I really, but I really do, because every time I've tried to, you know, I've used Octane and I've started to build my scenes, and I think I've got a fairly good understanding now of what, materials and nodes and how these things all play together. But I think there's something that you mentioned when we were just chatting, was the importance of maths and physics, which to me, as a creative, who studied photography and all of these things, and I like to draw, or it doesn't come naturally. However, you were saying that it's possibly one of the most important things that you should learn.
Yeah, so as always, there's multiple ways to go about that. So there's even photographers who know every detail about film emulation and film speed and stuff like that. And then there are also very famous photographers that just do, like, they hold their camera somewhat in the right position and then they just trigger the exposure and that's it. And they don't know about, like, what to set, and like they get very famous still for having, like, a good gut feeling about it, I guess. So you can go about that way also. Before I would call myself an artist, I'm a technician. So I would always go from the technical side of view towards a problem. I never, that's how I work. I admire people who can who are those those people who have the minds that explode with creativity. I was never such a person. I always got creative with technicality. So when there's a new caustic solver, for example, I can imagine what all the possibilities you can use it for, and that gets me creative, and not that I can do the most I don't know, colorful refractive noodles, to come back to the noodles theme. On the other hand, I think we missed something, and I tend to avoid to answer your questions. I think so. This is maybe unconscious, but when you talked about where my interest in realistic images comes from, I think it comes from actually old Greek paintings. So when I was younger and I didn't know about 3D, I was often found in the library looking at books with depictions of those oil paintings, like sea battles, or even the still lifes and stuff like that. And I was mesmerized by the detail painters could put in those paintings and the depth they could produce to create something that, for me as a viewer, looked realistic. And I think I took that with me to whatever I did afterwards. So before I was in getting my foot into 3D, I was very interested in photography also. So, and this then helped me a lot to get my camera work to be good in 3D, because as you know, there's a lot of similarities. Back then there was no exposure, or what's there, an aperture or stuff like that. In the old Cinema4D, you basically just had your field of view, and yeah, that's basically it. So you couldn't make your lights or your exposure darker and brighter. But with the time, when other renderers came around, V-Ray, for example, you were able to dial in stuff you had in your physical real-world camera. And I think that also helped me a lot. And of course, there's the whole image composition thing. So if you're composing your image, that also that's a more creative than technical side. But if you're already good at pointing the camera at stuff, you're not going to lose that if you transition to 3D. You'll stay you know what makes a good image. And so yeah, that's the less technical and more creative part of why I'm doing realistic stuff.
Because my thought process is always, okay, I'll try and get the composition right, or I'll try and do these things. Whereas it's only been quite recently where I've started to pay a lot more attention to the material side of 3D, because I feel like there seems to have been a shift where you've got things like Grayscale Gorilla, or you've got material packs where you can just drag and drop those onto your scenes, and it's almost for me it's almost like a quick fix where I can just drag and drop this plastic material onto there, but I'm not actually understanding what that's doing in my scene. So I've spent a lot of time, and thanks to your videos, being able to go through and have a deeper understanding of materials and material nodes, and start having a bit more appreciation for what these things are. But I'd love to know where you got that appreciation from and how you approach learning.
Yeah. So again, starting at the past. I don't know why that happens, but I always want to compare. Maybe I'm getting old. Back then there was this thing. But yeah, so right. So in the past, there was no physicality to 3D, so the artists had to really work there. It's sort of very similar to oil painting. So in your oil paint, there's no thing that says, oh, this paint will be good for an highlight or something like that, or that makes this structure in the painting. So you had to really dial in everything in your renders to make them look realistic, and you have to really have had a keen eye in your reality to get all those small little intricate details to replicate them into 3D. So like you had to know how a highlight would look and how it would change dependent on what lighting situation you are in and stuff like that. Nowadays that has completely changed. When we look at renderers, they are very based on reality right now. So of course there are non-photorealistic renderers also, but in general, if you talk rendering, they are mostly the approach, or the main render engines are taking the approach of physics. So when you change your material, when you change your light, that all is very similar or parallel to what you would have if you would shoot something with a camera in a studio or outside or wherever you shoot stuff. So yeah, that's where the physics come in, and that's where I found it very interesting to learn those approaches. And as I'm a very technical guy, I take those physical things as a sort of a pillar to guide me towards realism, towards a more realistic rendering result. So I guess we are now all of the renderers have reached like the peak of realism. So now we are drifting slowly in hyper-realism. So if you watch a lot of social media, you notice that the people don't go after the goal of creating the most realistic render, but like they go hyper-realistic. They have pastelic interiors with water in them and stuff like that, stuff that doesn't exist in reality. And like mostly those, like if you have glass or transparent stuff, this has a lot more, what's the word? A lot more dispersion than it would have in the real world and stuff like that. So like, but still, if you want to do those renders, if you want to go hyper realistic, it's still a good thing to be grounded in or guided by physics. Sorry if I'm rambling on too long.
No,
this is you don't say anything.
No, I'm just super interested. It's because I've never really had that explained before, really, where the, you know, how each one of them are at parity now. I don't, you know, in terms of, you know, whether it's Redshift or Arnold or any of these other things, I don't know if they are all at the same parity, but
more or less. So what I meant is like that there was this huge chase to make the photorealistic rendering that no one can tell apart from a photograph. And over the years, that challenge has become smaller and smaller because the renderers have gotten better and better. So the people like those on the front lines of the like on the that push the envelope, they search for something else. So if something has been done that in a way that it became easy because all the renderers had provided all the tools, then you search for something else no one ever had done before, or no one, like the next challenge, so to speak.
And I guess that's a great way of trying to keep it, you know, trying to keep things interesting for yourself as these, as the technology keeps changing. And I think that's something that I've noticed happens 10 times quicker when learning 3D.
Yes, definitely.
Than anywhere else.
But also it happens 10 times quicker now than like even 5 years ago. So like the curve has like it's exponential, and it's sped up everything quite dramatically in the last couple of years.
Yeah, like
so like you just got into it, but back then it was a lot slower. So I always say that to people who ask me like about like the trends and stuff like that, and I can't get like ahead of that. I'm too slow for that to chase after trends. So back then, when I sort of was already quite good in 3D, we had like 5 websites where people posted 3D artworks, and on a good day there were posted like 10 pictures over the whole web in like 3D artworks, and you could click through them, and then a couple of hours later you could go to the sites and see if someone else posted something else, and if not, then you had seen it all.
That was it,
and
yeah.
then you would do your day work. And nowadays, like, you get like every minute on Instagram there's like 10,000 of renders posted. So yeah, that's how times changed.
It's really difficult because when especially trying to pick this up, I think what I noticed was that there's almost a convergence element that happens on social media quite quickly with the types of art and 3D work that you see, where for some reason for 1 month it will just be all glass. Every 3D thing that I see is just a glass rotating material, and that's the thing. And then I'm like, okay, great, I'll do that. And then by the time I've learned that, it's just completely shifted to something else. And it's funny because I feel like it's almost like a wave of everyone learning something similar. And I wonder if that's interesting, or if you've had that before, where you've released a tutorial or you've done something and you've almost watched this been adopted by everyone in the 3D community.
Only to a very small degree. So I'm not very influential when it comes to that. So like I noticed it with the diamond very recently. So a couple of people have posted diamonds since then, but it's like nowhere near the donut, the famous donut.
But even to your, the diamond tutorial, I like going through that and just seeing how to again, just being able to model just using that polygon method, of taking it to just stripping down the object to its simplest form. We're just using the angles. We'll just take it down, just draw the one thing, and then we use an array to create the the centerpiece, and then how to even do the bevel on the side. It made me feel amazing. It was great. It was such a nice way of being able to, do something fairly complex that I wouldn't have done before. And I was just reading about this where, I was like, okay, so we've got the chance to model, and I think modeling's come to a point now where it's very quick and you can get very, very, very good results if you spend the time. But then we also have things like photogrammetry. And I was going to ask if you've played with photogrammetry or if that's something that you've considered within your workflows.
Yeah, so again, I'm very used to modeling myself, everything. So this has, of course, advantages and disadvantages, as always, everything has. But like I think that we are at the time where people don't have to do everything on their own. They can use libraries for materials. They can use libraries for objects, and you can see it on Instagram. They can get really good results by doing that, and really fast results also. So like there's always this thing for me that I don't know if that's a good thing, but I need to feel a little bit frustrated, and the process needs to feel a little bit painful for me in order to make good art. So like it's not that I'm frustrated by that. Actually, it takes away frustration from me, because when I do stuff like modeling, it's like very meditative. Meditative? How's the English word?
Meditative. Yeah, meditative. Yeah,
meditative. Right. Yeah, you get the idea. So like sometimes it's rather repetitive, and sometimes you have to model something, and then you know that at some point you messed up, so you had to destroy it again and model it from scratch, or even it might be only a part that you model from scratch, but that has something like really I'm not think spiritual is the right word, but like a mandala. The monks make the mandala for days and then they destroy it again just to make a better one, maybe. So it's like it has similarities there. So it takes my thoughts away from things that are hectic. Like if you can think of a lot of things today. So how is the world doing? Is the algorithm tuned to the stuff that I'm posting? Is like why does my the follower count not rise and stuff like that? So it can be really overwhelming. And while modeling, your brain is very engaged in figuring out like a puzzle. And so I really like that. And it's not modeling, it's also lighting and working in your 3D scene and doing stuff. So I really like it for this. And sometimes it becomes a little bit painful, but it also gives me quite a lot by being like this, like getting my attention to the point where it's needed, away from all the sources that are noisy around me. So that's why I like doing that, and that's why I like feeling a little bit of pain doing it. But like coming back to your question about photogrammetry parts, I think it's a completely different workflow. I think the workflow with photogrammetry or like with assets is more that people learn like to be really creative because they have those assets at their fingertips. They don't have to spend a week modeling, I don't know, a cherry or a walnut or something else, but they can just go into the library and pick it up if they want it. And this is a whole nother way of working. So they can try out stuff and like mix and match stuff until it feels good, until it really gives a solid composition and a solid rendering.
Yeah,
so yeah.
No, that's it's great because there are just so many ways. I think, just like I think what I've learned a lot about 3D is that there is so many ways to do the exact same thing, and there's no wrong way, or there might be a wrong way, but just to do it, I could model this cup, or I could get my phone and I could scan this cup and bring it in, and there's constantly decisions to be made. And then as a consequence of those decisions, there's problems to solve because nothing ever goes right. At least for me, anyway. There's not been one project where I've gone, yes, this has worked really well.
I think that's the things when you start up stuff that you don't know. It's like there's so many possibilities for it to go wrong. So with the time, so also if you do repetitive works, so if you do, like, let's say if you spend a year only doing logo animations, you figure out a way how to do them and how it works and stuff like that. So you get better at it. So it's always a learning curve combined with like stuff. If you learn stuff, you're getting better at it, and therefore avoid problems that can cause errors in the future. So yeah, when I like started 3D, I was it's like there's so many things you need to take care of, and it's very hard to even know those things. So I know that back in the day, Cinema4D, when I was doing logo animations, it would have problems with flickering highlights. So when I had text in them and a light source producing highlights, and they would flicker, and I couldn't figure out why it was that they flickered. And like, then I found some workaround, and like, then you just use this workaround, and I to this day don't know why the highlights were flickering back then, but like, it's really strange that like you adapt those workarounds so much so that you don't think about them as workarounds but as
your workflow. It becomes your
it's now
workflow.
Become a workflow. And like, you always have to deal with like workarounds in 3D or in your life. So like, and I think that's also the difficulty by switching software packages. So every software package has their own workflows or their own like things you shouldn't do, and you only notice them by doing them, and then you develop a workaround for that then becomes your workflow. So if you like, I'm in the beta of Cinema4D, and like, I think sometimes I'm too old to discover any errors in some parts of Cinema4D because I adapted those as a workflow, like not the error but the workaround as a workflow, and therefore never used the way that produces the error, and then I can't report it because I know I like unconsciously know that there must be something there, but I'm so used to working around that I don't even think about it.
Yeah, and I guess talking about software, have you ever been tempted, or have you tried Blender, or have you tried Redshift? And I'm assuming that you've just naturally converged to Cinema4D and Octane.
Well, I started with Cinema4D, so this is like a very long relationship now. But but I tried other software too, so I can do stuff in Blender. When I went to Axis for the Halo project, I worked in Houdini. So like, I think there's this point when you learn a lot of terminology and a lot of stuff, how 3D works, not just creatively, but in the technical aspects of 3D. You can skip software a lot more easy than if you just know the workflow inside of Cinema4D. So, for example, if you know that a polygon is made up of vertices and then the polygon and then the normals that point the polygon in the right direction and so on. So this is more or less the same in every 3D software. And then you just have to figure out how to access what you want to do in that software package. But since you already know how it's called in other packages or what you want to do and then can describe it sort of verbally or mathematically, there's like a very easy to find help in the internet. You can like write, how do I invert my normals in Blender, and you immediately will find the answer. So, but if you're still learning and don't know half of the terminology or half of how it works in the background, you of course then have a lot more harder time to convert to another 3D software. Like, I always compare that by, not that I speak so many languages, but by learning languages. So if you learn one language, you are very good at this language because you know nothing else. Then if you learn a second language, you struggle because you never heard about a second language. And like, by the time you have learned 10 languages, another language doesn't matter because you can source all your information out of the languages you already have learned.
Yes.
And I think it's the same for 3D.
That's a really, really great, that's a great analogy, because it's almost like trying to understand how, in this analogy, how do languages work? How is the language made? What are the ways in which it is? And that's the same as polygons and vertices, normals.
Yeah, and like in some languages, they have weird kind of ways to do stuff, and that's the same in 3D programs. Some 3D programs have like they work very similar to other ones, and some are very weird. And so like, but like this only is like partially to the program. Like they have parts where it becomes weird, and so like if you have vast knowledge of all programs, which I don't. I only know like 3 or 4 programs, and like I know Cinema4D the best, and I wouldn't call myself Houdini artist. I just do like small parts in there. So yeah, if you go for languages, then like those you can source information from other languages, from parts of those languages, and see, oh, that part is the weird part in that language, and that adapts to the other weird part in that language. So you can sort of mix and match there.
And I think that's the one thing that no one ever explained to me, was that you're not Cinema4D isn't the only thing you'll use. So when I think about 3D, it's you know, I didn't even know. I mean, I know this sounds really dumb, but I didn't even know an animation was made up of sequences, of an image sequence. I thought it was all video. You know, I thought people were just putting things out. I didn't even know multi-passes, you name it, because I was just coming from video. So I thought, oh, it would just be the same.
Yeah, that's...
And it's these tiny little things that just...
So much you need to learn over time. Yeah, I know the same thing. So that's a very, very, very basic mistake almost everyone makes when they start out with 3D. They render in like MP4 or something like that. So they don't know that this is not a good format to render in. So they start up the renderer and have like a 10-hour rendering. And then like after 5 hours you have like the electricity fails or something like that, and your machine restarts, and then your MP4 is gone, and you think, man, what now I have to render everything again. I speak from experience. I did exactly the same. Back then MP4 wasn't a thing, but I rendered in like AVI. What's the English?
AVI.
AV? Yeah, AVI.
Yeah.
AVI, yeah. So, like some Intel codec I used because I didn't know any better. And like how many hours I did render for nothing, because back then also the computers were a lot slower. So like you just had like a cube turning and it rendered 3 hours or something like that. I have to say that I also didn't have the fastest computer. I didn't have any money to buy fast computers back then.
And
So,
I think that there's also the level of expense where I think obviously these softwares are getting better and more widely adopted, but there is still you know, especially say graphics cards, a lot of these things that I had no idea what would improve my workflow. Again, I've only worked off a laptop, so I know that there was a ceiling for me. However, I've been doing a lot of research on RNDR and that side of Otoy and Octane and being able to send out these things, and that seems to have like lifted this veil off of me. It feels like someone's removed this cap of I'm stuck with my laptop here, and now I can go and access all of these GPUs if I want to. But even that, at the very beginning, I had no idea that just how resource intensive all of this can be.
Yeah, like this can also be a very good thing, and I consider that for myself too. So I was very, very limited when I started, and even like in the later years of my work, I didn't have the money to afford a good workstation. I was like very limited in the ways what I could do. But this on its own makes you very creative, so you learn how to cheat the program in... Sorry. You can cheat the program in getting a better result or a better looking result than it actually is. Or, yeah, so you find ways to make stuff look good without sacrificing the energy that normally must go into that. So nowadays a lot of stuff is done solely brute force. So and I resorted to that myself. So when I render those render sequences that have like tons of bokeh, like I have 4 graphics card here, like 3 3090s and a 4090, and like they render 25 minutes per frame.
Wow.
Like it's a 200 frame sequence. So like I let it render for a week.
Yeah, I was speaking to some of the guys from RNDR, and they were saying what with great power you get. It like comes great responsibility, and even when you get your faster graphics cards,
very true.
you just mean that you push the scenes more, and you try and put 2 million scatters in there as opposed to 1 million. You know, you just there's never.
That's very true.
You never reach this. You know, oh yeah, this is a perfect scene, and this is 1 minute render times, because you always just end up pushing the final.
Yeah. Also, the algorithms get better, so you can reproduce reality to a better degree, and they take render time for that and stuff like that. So I did some tests with Octane lately. So the more features they add in, the more stuff you can do with it, the slower it gets, unfortunately. So like, because I had the feeling that on my 580 I had an RTX, no, back then it was GTX 580, and was like with the first Octane version there was like 0.85 or something was the first Octane version that I used. And I had the feeling that back then it was so incredible fluid and snappy, and it wasn't really faster nowadays, even if the hardware went like 20 times the speed. So I couldn't go back that far, because Windows 11 and stuff, like the whole infrastructure is moving, so it's hard to get the old Octane working. But I noticed that with like newer Octane versions, they get sort of slower because of the immense functionality they have, and every thing we do in there has to phrase to more code, and like just those little read and write times, they add up, and then the rendering becomes slower. So it's not like very drastic, but it's always have been like this. And of course they can improve other areas, so they can improve their algorithms, so the rendering becomes cleaner with less samples and stuff like that. But on the other hand, of course, like this is what it is, and we have like faster hardware than ever, but also our tools might become slower if we have the functionality we are craving.
And on that point,
Yeah,
I did have
I don't know where this started. I already forgotten.
No, but I want to keep on this thread though, because I like this, because
right.
If you've gone from your Octane to, you know, from that very first version that you used to say this most recent one, what are the things that you would say have been the most game-changing within the software? Has there been any one thing? Is there multiple things within there where it's gone, wow, this was an update that I did not expect?
In general, they were very like, they just built on top of each other. So I guess the latest thing was the photon tracing that I really liked. I think it needs some more work to be used in bigger scenes, or to be, in quotes, production ready. But I really like the approach, and what you can do and what was not able to do before, or were not able to do before. In like there, so like there was this time, I think, about Octane 2, where they told every user that they were using like a false Fresnel formula in there to speed up the render time. So for me, it was quite nice to hear that they now are using the right and realistic Fresnel formula for all the materials. Like back in the switch from version 1 to version 2, I think they implemented that. And I was rendering with the wrong Fresnel formula and didn't know it and was happy. So that also tells you about, like, you often do not know that you are not completely physically accurate, but it looks good and this makes you happy.
Exactly.
Yeah, also, like, when I was I don't know, around version 3, I was starting to give trainings for Octane, and like there wasn't a lot to it. So you could, like, in a 2-day training, you could go through all of the features of Octane and be done. You had nothing more to say. And nowadays, if you do that, like you would need 10 days or something to get into every feature in depth and explain everything.
Because the biggest one that I think I've just tried to implement in my workflow was when they brought out the ACES tone mapping button, and now
I forgot about that. Yeah, that's also a big feature. That's true.
Yes, and I just finished watching your ACES and After Effects workflow now that After Effects has been updated,
right? Yeah,
which is great. And I wanted to ask, is this now? Would you say use ACES all the time now because After Effects can use it? It's ready to go. I'm just gonna keep using it, maybe.
I would say there's always like this thing that you should know what it's doing and therefore decide whether to use it or not. There's never the point where you say, yes, always use it.
Sure.
Like even with a lot of other stuff, if you could have the fastest car on earth and go to work with it every day, would you use it?
Yes.
And then is the decision good? Because if you have a lot of traffic lights on your way there, like that's the same with ACES. So I use it a lot of the times, but I still don't use it all of the times because there are things that are different with the, in quotation, normal workflow, with the sRGB workflow. So I would say it becomes more normal or more adopted, and therefore it becomes, I guess, more easy to use it, or easy also to use it in production workflows where other people are involved, because that's another point. If you're using it and the other person that you're working with doesn't understand what it's doing, there's like a very high chance of it being used in the wrong way, and therefore the result will suffer. And the result then might look worse than if you would go with a normal workflow with sRGB, where normal people I sound kind of normal people. No, that's like people, yeah. Where people know better how to deal with, or the knowledge is more like wider spread than how to deal with ACES. So yeah.
I guess are you impressed with how After Effects has implemented their ACES workflow?
I'm not sure how to answer to that. I think I'm not that impressed because they needed to implement it somehow, because it's like a comp tool and ACES is taking over more and more, and they had to find ways to do it. But
yeah.
I was fine with the old workflow, to be honest. So it even has some advantages. So the old workflow, for those who don't know, was you had this plugin that could convert colors, and it was called OpenColor.io plugin. So you could convert your ACES profile to an sRGB profile with a plugin inside of After Effects. So instead of After Effects doing the color work, your plugin did that. And the big advantage here is in the last step, where you want to convert your ACES to sRGB to get the good treatment of the tone mapping, you with the tone mapping also, you had no control about where your white point is. So if you had a scene with like a lot of normal white walls and no highlights, they would sort of go from being white to a light gray value. And some people threw that off because they were used to having like a brighter output for the normal sRGB workflow. So when you did that in comp, when you converted that, it was converted inside of After Effects. You could put another adjustment layer after the fact of the conversion and then pull up your white point a little bit, so you could take control over the exact amount how ACES is looking. And this is now missing because now you would have to export out of After Effects and then bring in the image sequence again without ACES and then do that step in there. So not sure if that's understandable, but
no, it is.
Watch my tutorial about the first workflow when there was no ACES implementation inside of After Effects. You can see that like the actual conversion is done within the comp, and you can do all sorts of stuff after the conversion. So whatever you like to do, and this gives us freedom to tweak the footage even more after the conversion. So that's now gone within the new workflow.
So I guess they've made things easier, but also harder to change, or less. It's easier and it's like a pro and a con. It doesn't seem like they've done anything useful yet again.
It's like there's always, like, if you streamline stuff, there's things that fall to the side because they are not used very often. And like, so those things for some people are important and for some are not. So there's always the designer that designs the user experience has to think about what is the best balance between usability or ease of use and the features, the feature richness of something. So
yes.
So sometimes things are thrown overboard for the sake of ease of use. And this happens quite a lot. So for Maxon, they have the reputation of being very easy to use. The UI of Cinema4D is very easy to use. You can get going in a short matter of time in there because it's like very intuitive. But that also makes it harder to implement features that are more like now I'm missing the words again. Sometimes that happens. Since I'm not native English, I'm searching for words then. So what I wanted to say is, like, sometimes you need features to get into a deeper level of control inside of programs, and for the ease of use they scrap that, so you don't have the control there. And the more you learn, the deeper you go, the more you miss those features. And I think that's a great reason why a lot of older Cinema4D users move to Houdini, because they want the control, but Cinema4D sacrificed that control in order to keep the interface clean.
Interesting. I didn't realize why there were so many. There obviously it seems to be the holy grail of 3D production software, essentially, or I don't know if it is, but it just looks.
So I'm not in a position to answer that since I use it very little. So you need to interview someone who's Houdini pro.
And I guess my next topic was on. I shared with you a document which you have very nicely gone through, which is
document, yes.
for context about In 2021, when I was kind of first going through Octane, I found it really difficult to actually know what each node did, because I'd never seen these things before. I didn't know what they were called, so I went and did a one-sentence explainer for each one. Most of it could have been wrong, but that's what I did. And then I was like, okay, this is good. I put it up on Reddit and some people liked it. And then I went, oh, okay, maybe I should revisit that. And so in the process of revisiting that, I then tried to put just a quick document together and try and see if I could put all of what I know on this document. Turns out Octane has grown astronomically from the last time I did this. You could like it. I don't even know how to compare it from all the OSL things. But the first thing I wanted to ask before we kind of get into this is, what did you think of my work? Be honest, was I really wrong?
No, you did good. You did good. It's I think what's really great, what seems really great is that you know where your knowledge ends. So like you marked it green and yellow and red, I think, and at some boxes you had question marks in there. So that's the correct way to go about that. So if you don't know about it, just don't write anything stupid in there that might be. Just leave it blank and ask other people that might know what's that node is doing. So yeah, and you knew a lot of those. So I was kind of impressed how many of those fields were already populated.
I guess like I don't even know if it was the right thing to do in terms of because I know that there's the manual, but even the manual doesn't have the Octane manual doesn't have half of the new nodes in there.
Yeah,
regardless.
It's always a fight in terms of updating stuff. It's a huge time effort to do that and to keep it up to date. Like Maxon is really good at this. Like they almost instantly, when they release a new version, update stuff like that. And I very rarely stumble upon pages where it isn't updated. But yeah, I have a lot of other software that doesn't do that. And you have to sort of, it's luck if you reach an article where it's where the manual is updated, or if you reach an empty page where it says, well, this feature doesn't exist.
Yeah, because
but it does.
It's just hidden away somewhere, because there's so many. Because I think there's the whole AOV system, which adds its own element to the node system, to the whole node thing as well, which is something that I haven't
to be more confusing about that, there's like the AOVs that are basically the multipasses of Octane, and then there's the other AOVs. I even don't know how it's called right now. Like I've forgotten it, because like there's render AOVs and other AOVs, but the other ones that are there for internal compositing. So there's like, even like, why wouldn't they call it compositing or something? But like they have like AOVs this and AOVs that, and it makes it very confusing for people who don't know what AOVs are and why there are now two entries in there.
There is, and there just seems to be, again, it's almost, even just in the fact of documenting this is just showing like the level of change and growth that's happening just with that software alone.
Yeah.
And I kind of wanted to ask your opinion.
Jules, I think Jules, the CEO, he's like very driving factor of everything, but I think that's like, it's also always a bit chaotic. So like if he thinks something has to be built in quite fast in order to do this and that, then he tells the team very shorthandedly, I think that's all speculation right now, shorthandedly to build that in. And then, of course, the team does it, but outside of the team, no one knows about it. So, like, stuff like ends up in versions where, like, even Ahmed, he is maintaining the Cinema4D plugin. I sometimes stumble upon stuff that he didn't know was changed. For example, latest thing I stumbled upon was the slider for the dispersion. And the slider for the dispersion was going from 0 to 0.1, and now it's going to 1. And this was a change, and like he didn't know about that. So I like used a newer material, the in the compositing material. So like a layer, and in the layer it was going from 0 to 1. But if I created a normal specular material, it was just going from 0 to 0.1. So I wondered why this is. So I talked to him, and he said, "Oh, they must have changed it in the last version. I didn't realize." So yeah, sometimes it's like this.
I guess
so. Yeah, it will be updated in the next update.
Exactly. I just feel like it's quite interesting to be in the development cycle. You always feel like you're part of the development cycle when you're with them. I think with Cinema4D, it's very much, here's what it is, this is what you're getting. Whereas I feel like there's a bit, it kind of feels like, I don't know, it feels a bit more rock and roll, this whole Octane thing, where you just, well, they'll do.
To their credit, to their credit, I think that they're doing a good job in bringing in the community into their decisions. So at least I have the feeling, because of course I'm very close to them. I hope that the other part of the community has the same feeling. Like it's great to see that, like, if some feature is requested, that it doesn't take 10 years to implement it. It can be rather fast, and it's sort of half democratized. That means that, of course, Jules still has the decision if it's going in or not. But if a lot of people requesting it, then there's a very high chance of being implemented, and it's really great. So I've also developers reaching out to me and ask if that's the right way to implement it. For example, when they did the metal material with the where you can put in the wavelength for different colors and therefore get the IOR for the metal. So they presented me with a beta build, and it had 8 input channels for different wavelengths, and I told them that's too much. Nobody will look up 8 different wavelengths for metal. So yeah, they reduced it to 3, and sort of that got less accurate by that, but more people will use it with that. So yeah, again, we are at the how user-friendly are you going to do it, or you're giving the raw power of the tool to the user, which then might be never used because it's too complicated.
Yeah, because I feel like there's a big, for me at least now, I think it seems like I've got a fairly good understanding. I'm slowly starting to build out animations, and the speed of being able to render out these animations with Octane's RNDR service, the one that is something that I wanted to just touch upon quite quickly, because I wanted to ask if there's any other way of rendering an animation sequence that fast. Because to me at the moment, I don't think there is.
Yeah, I think I have to agree. So the amount of GPUs on the network, on the render network, is so vast that I think it's unparalleled. Even huge render farms don't have that power. There's, of course, as always, disadvantages. So you have to translate your scene to be able to render it there, and that can make frames not render correctly and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But if it's just about the render power, then I guess must be one of the biggest. Even that's because it's decentralized. If you cannot compare it to AWS from Amazon, because this they have a lot of money, but they have only so many resources. But thousands of people, every one of them has their own resources and buys graphic cards and stuff like that. So it can scale a lot bigger than even the biggest single company that does the same service.
It's something that I've loved kind of pushing just to see how far can it like how far can it go. But again, I think what it's kind of bringing me back to is that same, you know, the same approach that you had when you first discovered Octane and you realized I don't need to wait for V-Ray to guess what my scene's going to look like. I almost have a real-time feedback now, but for animation, 3D animations, as opposed to just a singular image, where I mean physically I can't render on this laptop because it would take me too long for even just a single frame, where I'm like, oh, that's great. And it's now getting me to a point where 3D animations are becoming quickly iterative, or very quick to iterate on, which I didn't think was something that I'd ever be able to do, ever. Never mind now.
Yeah, like it's an interesting time we are living in. Like a lot of those resources are cloud-based, so they're somewhere else where you use them. Also, like stuff like the AI things with the diffusion models, they are running on graphic cards on computer network somewhere in a computer center, and like also ChatGPT and stuff like that. So yeah, it's distributed a different way. So I come from the time where this wasn't used. So I'm still liking the having the render power at hand. That also can be a good thing, because you then are not like, you need electricity, but even if the internet cuts out, you can still render. Basically, now the license thing is another point here, but if you have offline dongles and stuff like that, you could still do that. And like, it's just a philosophy thing in the end. So I also rendered via render sometimes, and it's a great service. So you can really, like, it's a lot faster than my render farm here. And
you've got a beast of a setup.
Yeah, so what I was mentioning before, that's my workstation. Then, like, I never sold any graphic cards, so I have all the older cards that I owned also still running. So in the office we have around, I think, 23 graphic cards or something like that. So yeah, that's like like there's a lot of 1080 Ti's. That's when I started to really buy them in bulks. So I have, like, I don't know, 5 or 6 of them, and then like 2080 Ti's, and then like we bought them 3090s whenever they were available, because there was this shortage. Yeah.
It's like, I have a really dumb question, because I haven't had
Sure.
had this explained. Like, the difference between, say, having, I don't know, 8 1080 graphics cards versus like 140 90 or something. Is there a major, you know, I don't really know how, when you're sending something to a render, to render, how that signal is being sent, and what is Octane using, and when it comes to a GPU rendering.
I think the least amount of devices you use, the least error prone it is. So if you're dividing your scene to multiple devices, even if it's in your computer, so speaking of 8 GTX 1080 Ti's, that means the signal has to arrive at every one of those intact. And while it does that mostly, it is like more easy to just have one path. But in order of rendering, that should take exactly the same amount. So if, like, the Octane bench is equally strong, so if you have 1300 Octane bench with your 3090 and equally many 3080 Ti's that represent the same Octane bench, then you shouldn't have any difference in render times. So there's, of course, a couple of differences, mainly the VRAM, because it's larger on the 3090, so it's 24 gigs on there, while the 1080 Ti's have, I think, 11.5, something like that. Very strange number. So not 12.
Okay.
Right, for whatever reason, I think they just thought, oh, we can save $20 per card by not producing the 12 gigabyte module on there. So something like that, maybe. I don't know. Right, and the other thing is that the newer cards have RTX as acceleration, so they can use those cores to produce even like faster results. And like this on the network can cause problems. So if you have cards that cannot use RTX and have other cards, other nodes that can use RTX that utilize that, dependent on your scene, that can produce errors. And like this is very dependent on your scene. So for example, there is this thing where you have like intersecting polygons. So two objects have their polygons on the exact same plane, called set fighting sometimes. So because they then fight for the priority of which polygon is in front of what. And like there can be a difference in whether the like RTX is enabled or not, what polygon is counted as in front. So they like if different nodes have render different frames, one sees the one polygon in front and the other node sees the other in front, and that then can lead to flickering during the animation. So yeah, with glass objects where you can see through and see like have this, like if the object is not transparent and they have like, if you put a mug on the table and the mug's floor is intersecting with the table, you don't care because no light is there to, like it's not visible. Like if you put a glass on the same spot, or if you make your mug a glass mug, I don't know if that exists, but yeah, you can see the set fighting, and therefore you have a problem when you do animations. So that's like, those are the really small bits where I think that like people that really understand their subjects in 3D take care to remove those eventual errors or those places where they can occur. They do not need to occur there, but there's a possibility for them to occur there. And the more knowledge you have, the more you can try to prevent that when you do the scene. And also, like, this is, of course, then taking you a lot longer to create the scene. Like, there's always a chance you slap everything together, render it, and it just works. There's no flickering. There's just works perfectly, and that's fine. So yeah, I think a lot of people have like sort of a mixed workflow where they know sort of where stuff might break and stuff is working. So when you're working with transparencies and refractions and stuff like that, those are like with intersections are a lot more prone to produce flicker. So when I put scenes together, I always make sure to have like a gap between the glass and the table to not make them intersect and stuff like that. So yeah,
I guess that's mainly just learning from previous mistakes and just building those all up
like,
to
like for all of you who are listening or watching that think I'm a superhuman, I'm very, very far from it. The only difference between you and me is that I'm doing that for around 20 years now. So, and like I've gone through a lot of stupid mistakes and like learned from those. For example, rendering to MP4s or like Intel codecs back then.
No, but again, like I think it's great that, I mean, for me being on this M1 machine, Octane couldn't use VDBs. It just wouldn't load for whatever reason. And I was there like, I'm going to put clouds in, I'm going to put fog in, I'm going to do all of these things. And then for whatever reason, it just didn't, it just wouldn't work. The newer version on the Mac does, which is fantastic.
Right.
So I can now play with Pyro and do all of these things.
Yes, but you found out that they're really rendering.
No one told me how big VDB files are. Wow.
Oh, yeah.
Wow, they're huge. They are massive.
There's like this library from Moana, or what's it called? I think it had a different name in English. I can't remember right now. It's like the Disney movie where like they have that place in Hawaii.
Yeah, Moana.
So yeah, Moana. Okay, then it was the right name. So they have like the one of the clouds they placed in the sky, and it's like 2.5 gigabytes. You can download that. It's like a stress test for Octane.
Maybe I'll do that on my laptop, but I also don't want to melt it at the same time. You know, I don't want to leave it.
Yeah, what I find really like not that intuitive is that you sort of need very small step length in order to get the detail out of the VDBs. So in your material, so to speak, in your fog volume, you have like the step length. And a lot of people leave it like to very large increments because it renders a lot faster. But then you like don't get the density and don't get the detail of that. And like it's always the like, do I have more detail or do I want the faster render times?
Yes. And I think I noticed that on the Pyro sim that I did, where I just left everything standard because I was just happy that it worked.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
I was like, wow. And then it was only when I was putting everything together in After Effects afterwards where I noticed that it looked quite voxel-y. That's you know?
All right, yeah.
It looked like it was made up of, in some areas, it looked like it was made up of just little squares.
Yeah, but that's the resolution of the simulation. And then there's like the resolution of the rendering, so to speak. So you can like, if the light goes through the volume, you tell the light ray how large the distance is before it takes another sample. So if the distance is shorter, of course, you going to increase your render time by quite a lot because the ray is not moving through the volume in a straight line. It splits up, and then you have 2 rays in different direction, and you have 4 and then 8 and then 16. And like if you have them like travel 10 centimeters, you have a lot less data to collect than if you put it to like 1 millimeter. So like it's more than exponential growth there, and you notice that.
Yeah, I think that's what, like I'll just slowly start pulling it across, and it doesn't take a lot for it to crash Octane anyway on this anyway.
Yeah, I usually type in all the numbers there, so yeah,
it's
like sliding sometimes can be very non-beneficial in Cinema4D. I had Cinema4D like not react. It doesn't crash per se, but like, for example, if you have a spline and want to place clones on it, and then you slide your slider and it says 30 million. And then you have to wait 2 minutes till like the process is done to calculate 30 million objects on the spline. So I never used the sliders because of like I could run into situations.
Exactly, just a slip on the mouse and that's all. You know, it's game over.
Yeah.
Like that's all you could do. And I guess like
I think like sometimes Cinema4D has like in most places they have very reasonable limits. But I think I was like instead of setting the amount of copies, I setting the distance of the copies along the spline. So I was like moving the slider down to almost 0, and that makes like so many copies along the spline then. So it's essentially the same problem with the step length and the volumes.
No, that's it's something that I have absolutely loved, this sort of learning journey of like, okay, what do all of these things do? None of it seems to be intuitive, but then some things are really intuitive where you're like, oh, that's great. But I wanted to ask, after 20 years of doing this, do you still get that? it sounds like, and obviously you still get that same joy of seeing your image there.
Sure, yeah, of course. It's mostly also due to the fact that, of course, there has been a lot of development in this part of the 3D space. So when I looked at images back then, they were like looking not close to the realism and fullness and color and stuff like that that you have nowadays. So like I think that also makes being a 3D artist so interesting, because there's so much change in the space all the time that it never gets boring. And also, like, if I wanted to, I can learn whole new areas that I never like developed knowledge about. For example, characters, and like there's so many experts who know like how muscles work and how to animate stuff, and like really complicated stuff also, and it's also in the 3D space, but I never touched it because I'm like I developed my knowledge in the space of materials and in the space of hard surface modeling and stuff like that. So it's like all this side of knowledge that I have, but there's like an open world in all the other directions.
So for someone starting out who wants to get into the materials side of Octane, what would you tell them to look out for?
Right. So I guess like there's a good couple of tutorials or reading material if you go and search for PBR materials, because like nowadays PBR is somewhat connected to working with specific types of textures, but basically it means physical based rendering. And by that, the articles you can find by searching for that, they explain more or less well what is important for being a physical material, and therefore you can gain a lot of knowledge about that. There's also from Andrew Pierce from Blender Guru, there's a couple of videos for cycles on that. But as I said, like a lot of renderers have the same or nearly the same technology right now. So they all work with the same values. They have an albedo or a diffuse, then they have a reflection with an IOR, then they have a refraction with an IOR. They have roughness or glossiness that sometimes changes, but in overall they like all work sort of the same along the same lines. So that's also like sort of what I was meaning, or sort of what I was about with the languages. So if you know the materials, or if you know renderers, then you can watch a tutorial about Corona, and I'm talking about the renderer obviously. Maybe a bad example, but yeah. Their marketing team must have been feeling really unwell during the time.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah, so right. So when you watch a video about one of the renderers, you can adapt stuff to other renderers and like cycles and Octane. So when it comes to materials and physics, then even the detail settings do not matter that much. So like if you're talking about the global physics, what light is doing when it's hitting a material, what options does it have when it does that? What is a reflection? What is the IOR or index telling the photon? Why is it changing its behavior when we change the density of the material, changing the value of the IOR? So if you like learn all that, you can use whatever renderer you want. You can use Redshift, you can use Cycles, you can use Corona, you can use Octane, and get the same result out of there, because they all work on these physics and as a basis. So yeah, it's like not limited. Don't search for realistic Octane materials, search for PBR materials or like find find YouTube channels that are known to be high quality, and then watch material tutorials on there, no matter what renderer they are for. So if of course, if they are for anime style render type, then you're lost there. But most of the tutorials are about physical based rendering and not non physical rendering. Yeah. So that's what I want. There's so much. So there's even if you want to go really, really, really deep and sort of to the border of programming, there's this site called Scratch Pixel. And this has some portions of the site. So this site is an open source project of people who are trying to get people to program or to understand how to program a renderer. You can, in order to program a renderer, you need to have the basics for what it should do. And basically it lays out also those portions about color and about light, and what color is doing, what light is doing, and what the expected results are when you program that renderer. And that helped me a lot by reading through that, because it not only explains it in a physical way, but it also ties it in together with the way programs are made. And I'm not a programmer, I don't know programming, but I can read through text like that and then sort of get an idea how different algorithms are implemented. So all I have about software is ideas how stuff is being done. So I'm not particularly smart, I would say. So I need to break down everything for myself. So I read through text 10 times and then I take the essence of it to get it into my head and remember it. And I think that is also the reason what makes me so good at explaining stuff.
Yes.
Because if you really if you have a high capacity brain and understand everything at the first go, you don't need to distill something out of it. You just understand it. And if then someone asks you, then you just repeat that. And then if that one was me that asked, I wouldn't understand it because it was so high level. So I guess because I'm not having the capacity in my brain, I distill it down for myself to understand it. And that makes me then somehow good at explaining it.
You must be very proud of everything that you know, because you're able to to package it up into a tutorial and let us all know. And I did have one question on here that I did want to ask, which is, when you look at the future of 3D rendering and everything that you know, and obviously you've seen this transition from the very first version of Octane or Cinema to where it is now, where do you think it's going? And with the likes of, say, AI and Gen 1 by Runway, which is the stable diffusion but for video, do you see this industry shifting a lot?
I never been good with predictions, so take everything with a grain of salt, I guess. I would say that I think we're at the brink of another revolution in that terms, because I think it's on the same scale as the Industrial Revolution. Back then, when machines were put everywhere, and they had a great impact on the world. So overall they made the world better, but during the first years of doing that, there was also a lot of suffering. And I'm not sure how the future will go for us, but it's if you look at the past, if you look at history, usually transitions are also causing a lot of suffering always. There's not like never a transition where everyone's happy. So I don't know exactly where it will go, but I think that there will be a transition from like the work we are doing right now to a different kind of work that will become the standard in the future. So I don't know if it will be prompts. There's like the let me find my words here. I think that stuff is moving so fast now that it becomes very hard to predict where it's going. So, for example, it could be brain interfaces that we do 3D with. We don't even have to type out stuff. It will take the signals from our brain and then interpret them to whatever we want it to be. What I don't think is that the prompt-based AI will go that far, because it's rather limited. So let's say we have a company with a very specific product. Let's say we have a keyboard manufacturer and we have a keyboard that looks in a certain way. So you would have to write 2 pages of text to describe that keyboard and all its features in order to make the algorithm spit out an image that looks exactly like what you are after, maybe even more text. So like I think that's where 3D right now still has a place, because like it's good with dreamy sequences, it's good with like moods and with sort of lighting situations and stuff like that, sort of sketches, but it's not good at details where you have very like, if you have a new iPhone, you want the cameras to be at the exact spot where they are in the construction data. You cannot just tell the AI to make an iPhone 16 and have it like figure out where everything is.
I can't wait to see the iPhone 16 advert generated by Midjourney and the cameras just all over the place. You probably get done for false advertising, because I don't think I was expecting cameras everywhere.
But yeah, there's like also there's helpers, of course, so you can load in your CAD data into 3D and then go off of that, then just color it roughly the way it would look and then tell the AI that it should take the shape and then put a reflection on that and stuff like that. But yeah, I think until we are like for image videos, like having like products and videos that show on fairs where you present something, feature and stuff like that, I think it will take a while till AI will adapt to that, and I don't know what way it will adapt to that. I guess there's like, as I said, the speed in which stuff is moving is so immense that it's really hard for me to predict anything. There could be a new model tomorrow that does stuff like that. So I don't know.
There's it's kind of funny because that point you made about the user interface changing for 2023.
Yep.
It's almost as if you were to remove the user interface for 3D in order for it to just be a prompt, is essentially what is one option of going down that route, where it's decoupling the technology for it to be a human user interface for, let's plug all of these buttons to let me write that I want a sunlit room.
But I guess you are in the situation where you want to explain someone some problem in 3D, and it's really, really hard to find the right words to express in detail what the problem is. And like, that's not going to get better if you text it.
Exactly. You know, it's like, I have a flickering white polygon in this corner of my screen.
Yeah, either that or like, if you like, sometimes I'm communicating with other 3D artists and then I tell them, so yeah, so you have like your keyboard and your reflection is not right. I think you need to move down the key to like a couple of units. Like what does mean move down? Is it like what axis and stuff like that? Is it like inside of the keyboard or like, I don't know. So it's like you have to, like with 3 dimensions, it's so hard to have a language that is very precise about what you mean. You can show it very easily. You can like screen grab it and show like move it this way. But if you really want to say it in words, it becomes utterly hard. At least for me, there might be some geniuses out there.
Yeah, no, I think it's to your point, the vocabulary you need to understand what you want out of the software in its own right. You would need to have that vocabulary as an input for those tools and softwares to give you the right output, whatever that may be, if you're going for this keyboard manufacturer wanting those things.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so it's like mostly like learning a different language altogether then. So like you, instead of having a UI, you have like sort of also tool sets described by words and then just put them next to each other. Yeah. I'm not sure if that's an easier way to do stuff.
It's either that or like, do you know on the PlayStation, like playing GTA and you've got cheat codes? That's what I would think of it being like, you know, like you left L2, L1, R1, R2, up, down, up, down, up, down, and that would do something. It's essentially trying to find routes to those.
Yeah, also there, like, I figure that with AI, there's this problem that we don't really understand how it's formed. So it might be that the next version, or like, let's say we have an AI version of Cinema4D, and we use prompts to create stuff. So there's a new version with a new learning set coming up. So it's version, I don't know, 2030. And then like somehow the prompts all change because it's like not stable in the sense that the learning is being done exactly the same way. So you have to relearn everything. Like there's a lot of question marks up there. How is stuff done? How, like, we are in the finding of the right way of doing it, I guess, right now. But yeah, there's like always also the problem if like things is going too fast that we make mistakes and then we never fix them, so they stay with us for a very long time.
Yeah.
And I think that's like, for example, when CRT screens were invented, like the whole sRGB and linear color thing comes from that. Like, why is there a stupid color curve in our pictures? Why do we need to do that every time? Why is there a linear workflow? What is different between linear workflow and sRGB? And all of that comes from the point where they made CRT screens and they broadcast pictures or televised pictures to them. And they, like, when they first tested them, they sat in front of them and were going, like, this is kind of dark. I don't see anything there. It's, like, very contrasty. What do we do? And some scientists said, well, let's just throw a gamma curve in there. That makes things brighter.
I wonder if that scientist ever knew what he'd done for the entire industry at that point. And
then like when we had like there's more reasons, I guess. So like this is very rudimentary how I put it, but like when they changed it to being digital displays, so like when they had the first flat screens, they could have changed that, but so much of the infrastructure was relying on that they thought, no, we don't touch that, we leave it as is.
So we'll get to our AI version of Cinema4D 2030, but we'll still be using a linear workflow and sRGB.
Maybe yes. I Yeah, my realistic prognosis for that is that sRGB will be there at 2030. Yes. I guess it will be like more and more interchanged to newer formats, because right now what we saw with the emergence of HDR televisions, there's like different workflows that work in a different way, and then I'm not sure when will be the time that we say, okay, that sRGB is just a legacy thing that needs to be there in order for a couple of few people to use it. Other people are using something else. I don't know, ACES 5.0 or something.
Yeah, I guess because there's so many avenues. Because I guess if you were, I don't know, say you were doing something, I don't know, VFX for studio or something, and that's going to be on a projector, or that's going as a HDR for maybe Netflix, I'm thinking, if that's what they take. Yep. You know, so you have to deliver in that one. But then if I say it's just me and I'm just doing this to post on my Instagram and be like, oh, look at this, I would never need that HDR workflow, because no one would ever be able to view my things on the highest format, unless I bought myself a really fancy TV.
You can watch it yourself. Look at this.
And no one else.
yeah. Invite friends and show them your pictures. Look, that's
exactly.
HDR.
And I guess along with these, obviously we've got the future of, say, Cinema4D and things, but I think the one of the biggest things coming into this was knowing which software to choose was quite difficult, because now we have, say, Unreal, which has become a lot more used for traditional 3D motion graphics than I ever thought it would be.
Yep.
And then I know I'm hearing flushes of other softwares that people can use, and I feel like we're all just everything's converging to this point, and I don't know what that point looks like. And it terrifies me to know, am I...
3D singularity.
Yeah, it's like, are we just turning into some sort of 3D embryo thing of like, it's all one, it's all one thing, you know?
Sounds like Evangelion, the anime. Like, you don't know, like we turn all in some goo. Like we all together in our 3D goo. I don't know.
I know what I'm making next.
I don't know how many people will get that reference.
No, it really is not a struggle, but I think especially spending so much time and just enjoying it. I think that's the main thing. I've just been liking the learning process.
Yeah, genau. That's exactly what I was going about before when I talked about modeling and stuff like that. It turns your attention to something in front of you that is very like instructive. You know what to do, and turns your attention away from all of the fuss and noise that it's out there. So I guess that's also my way of not going insane.
Yes, because I think there's a lot of anxiety right now for a lot of
for a lot
of creatives, and it's difficult if you spent your entire life working towards not these tools, but to create work, and then being able to see that replicated so easily and so quickly. I don't think there's any other way to resolve that anxiety at the moment.
Yeah, no, it's like everyone is dealing as best as he or she or them could with that. So it's like really hard times in that sense, because there's like this huge uncertainty out there, and we are coming from times where everything was certain, so we are not used to it. Like, I think we are in the longest peaceful time on Earth ever, and we are used to having the stability. We can count on having the resources, having everything tomorrow that we have today, and things are changing, and I think that's is causing a lot of anxiety, because we are losing this stability in our constructed society.
Yeah, And there's
Yeah.
I think it's also annoying because there isn't a person to go and shout at. It's
It's not.
it's a constant.
Like, I always refer to Zeitgeist. I don't know, like, if that's like, it's a German word. It's Zeitgeist, but it's also an American or English word. And like, there's like, sometimes there's in society or in our history, there were points where like there was a change in direction, and no one knew where it was going, and no one could even predict where it was going. There's always a few that later on you read about books about them and say, wow, he really knew what's going on. But like, if you ask a million people, there's always one or two among them who is right about the wildest things they will say.
No, I thoroughly agree. I think, to your point about just sitting down and having something to focus your mind on, and that
it's sort of the monk way to do stuff, like be in the present, do the task, to like enjoy what you're doing right now. Don't think too much about the future. Of course, you should think about what to buy to eat for tomorrow. Like, if you're so in the present that you forget to eat and tomorrow is Sunday, then, well, you have a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like, I'm always like, I don't want to sound like someone who knows it all. I'm doing this as I go, as well as a lot of other people, and I figure it out as I go. So I'm still like struggling with a lot of stuff, like with all the news coming in, all the noise around me. I think that's might even relieve people, that to know that I am as well struggling with all of that. And I like, some days are better than others, and some days, like, I find when I have tasks, when I have a scheduled plan, when I have some work to work at, to work out, then I am a lot more calm than on those days where I don't know what to do, and then I go on social media and spend time there, and then I get distracted from one topic to the other. And yeah, so I think that routine, for me at least, is what keeps me sane. Routine, and like having really stuff to pay attention to, concentrate, to make something for me. And I think that's also like, I'm already rambling on again, but I'm finished soon. What I think is, when you look at all social media, it can be really have a bad effect on your mind, because like, it's changing so rapidly, and there's so many ideas, and also that noise pushing in on you. So you might feel pressured to also do that, to also like make the fastest possible work and put it out there as soon as possible. But I think that just then adds to the noise. I think what Cornelius is doing is really good. He takes his time to make the work as good as possible, and he takes his time to build up something that can make an impact. And then when he's certain it's as good as it can be, he puts it out. And this is what made a name for him. Not that he's posting every day, not that he's posting in quick succession but with lower quality. No, he is the guy who is putting quality work out, and that's it. So yeah, I think that's like, for a lot of people, that should be a goal, to not work towards the time when you post next, but work towards a goal that you think you have in mind to reach. Make a goal to a good scene, to something that can have an impact, and then put it out. At least that's my take.
No,
on it.
it's after speaking with Cornelius, that's exactly kind of what I've tried to follow in his wisdom, which was, you know, because
Yeah.
I was almost chasing that element of I need to be producing quickly, and what I've started to do
Yeah.
is storyboard a much bigger piece, which is way over, you know, my ambition is greater than my technical ability right now. It's like, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. But then slowly start to approach those problems individually. So one of them is, how do I use cloth? How do I use this in order to create this scene? And then slowly start working on something much bigger, because overall it will lead to a much an output that you can be much, I think how he termed it was much more rewarding, and you don't have the 24-hour cycle doesn't apply to your work at that point of social media, of I put all my heart and soul into one image and now it's gone and no one's ever going to see it again, which is something that can affect you, and then you end in that downward spiral.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic that also have like a lot of different philosophical answers to that, I think. So everyone, and that's a good thing, that everyone has a different worldview. Everyone has a different understanding of what's around him, or what makes him do the things he does. And therefore, like, no answer applies to all of them, all of people. Like, might be that someone is totally happy posting twice a day on Instagram, like the greatest 3D stuff he can put together in the time. And all the power to them. I don't hold those people back to do that. If they have fun, if they can make a living for that, that's great. And for me, it's different. Like, I'm in between, like, regular posting and Cornelius somewhere.
Yes. And
like, I never do that big scenes.
But then also fitting in times to do a tutorial and all of those things, you know.
Yeah, that's true.
You know,
but as I said, I concentrate on the explaining part. You never see my face in there. You don't have fancy animations and stuff like that. So
I'm just doing the fancy animations because I don't know what I'm talking about. That's my
yeah. And no, that's. And I totally like your fancy animation and your production quality. There's also, it's like, all the power to you. If you like, you're doing it, making good videos. Like, I always wondering why people are put up with the quality I deliver.
It's because they are
I think, like, there's no animations in there. There's like a sort of long intro, much too long, explaining nothing but rambling, and then I go to the 3D part, and then there's like non-glorious stuff in there, just me explaining stuff.
I just love the quick tips ish.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a quick tip.
Yeah, I had I had the idea to make quick tips because they were short and concise and really, like, down to the point, and it's really hard to do those. Like, I never got some videos. I think the shortest one is like 3 or 4 minutes, and that's really short in terms of my like worldview of what a quick tip is.
I think there's something to that though, because it shows that obviously you want to tell everything that there is to know about this feature.
Yeah, that's like sort of OCD from me. So I also, with my work, that is the same thing. So I want to make everything as good as possible as I like, to my abilities. And when I explain something, it's really, really hard for me to leave something out. So I want to really be precise. And then the videos get really long.
But I think
So,
we're
yeah.
all grateful the fact that they are so long, because I honestly can't tell you how thankful I am for everything that you have done, because I 100% would not be anywhere the 3D person that I'm trying to be without your work. So I sincerely
that's very
thank you.
kind of you.
Sincerely.
I think there's a lot of other content out there that does the same, but thank you.
Right. just for meeting you, just wanted to say, I would like to know just a little bit. What do you have? What's on your mind for the rest of 2023? Where do you think you're going to be focusing?
So obviously I'm going to try to do a tutorial every week, a quick tip.
Quick tip.
A longer quick tip, long tip, or a quickish tip. So yeah, like it's interesting that this caught on. So I was asked, I think someone commented that, well, this is not a quick tip, it's 40 minutes. And I just answered that time is relative, because like if you think about the birth of a star,
Exactly.
40 minutes is next to nothing. But yeah, I can see it in the comparison to the other quick tips, of course. I just like to think about stuff out of context a little bit. Now, where do I see myself, or what do I do? Well, I think I will try to make a little bit of larger scenes. In the case of like if you look at my scene, if you look at the body of my work, everything I do sort of is like table sized, I always call it. So you can like have a macro lens on your photograph and then just go down at the eye level of the objects and do the stuff. But like back in the days, I always also did bigger scenes in the sense of doing a room or doing like a part of a landscape and stuff like that. But that sort of, I don't know why, but I stopped that somehow. So I want to go and get back into that and doing like maybe a pond with a boat in it and stuff like that. So getting, like, I already begun, I don't know if you've seen, yesterday I posted some work in progress pictures of the transmission tower. Yeah. So it's something just a little bit bigger, because it comes with other challenges than small stuff. I think I figured out the small stuff pretty good, and maybe I struggle with the large stuff a bit more, so I challenge myself to do that a little bit more. Then what I always also struggled with is telling a story, and maybe I managed to get that into the pictures a little bit more. I'm not sure still, because I don't know why, but as I said, I'm no master. I do good 3D in the sense of quality, but I could improve immensely in other areas. For example, telling a story with my pictures. That's also a thing that Cornelius is very great at doing, the figuring out a lore for his pictures that all take place in a certain area and stuff like that. So yeah, something like I'm not saying that I'm involved in getting a lore of like the Silververse. I don't know. I'm just like wanting to tell, maybe with one picture, like a story, or convey a certain feeling, or tell people, hey, this is something has happened here, or something like that.
Yeah.
Because this is another layer on top of good 3D that can make it have more impact, can make it have more weight. And I feel that this has been missing from my pictures in the past.
Wow.
Yeah. So just pretty, I just make pretty photorealistic renders. That's cool, but you can add so much more to that.
Oh, well, I cannot wait wherever it is that you're going to be doing. And I was just looking, because the rust that you have on that that transmission, the pole, the telegraph.
Transmission tower.
Yeah. So is that just like loads and loads of dirt shaders, or is that lots of very fine tuned?
No, that's it's kind of fine tuned. I got asked this quite a lot, so I usually have a procedural approach, or what I call a half procedural approach. So when I would do that in Substance Painter, I would end up with like, I don't know, 2 gigabytes of textures alone for the tower. I guess because like it's a lot of small parts, but every one of those has like every one of those L-shaped metal pieces has a different length, and they have the screw at a different position. So I would have to bake down a texture per piece, and like the transmission tower has a lot of those L-shaped pieces to hold it together. So this wasn't very viable solution for me. You could do that, obviously. So to make it half procedural, I was using noises, but the half in the half procedural comes from I still use textures. So I shoot some textures every now and then, and I had some textures of a rusty metal piece, and then I had some textures of like, there's like this small white stuff on there too, that like sort of ultra.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if
algae.
the right,
Is it
like
algae?
Yes. Algae. Yeah. Sorry, butchering that. Yeah, algae. Yeah. So I guess that's also the wrong term for things living on a transmission tower. I think it's more like moss or something like that. But yeah. Anyway, so I had photos from like mosses or like those things too. So I mixed those together, and then I used different, as you said, different dirts to reveal those based on the topology of the mesh.
Wow. Okay. Because I
so
like
yeah,
this.
it's like it's not really fine tuned, but like I spent maybe half a day on it for the shading.
Wow, but it looks so good.
Yeah, I was surprised myself, to be honest.
Just taking a step back and go, wow, okay.
Like, there are those times where you think like you're sitting at something and you think, man, I'm a shading artist. I'm doing this for almost 20 years now. Why isn't that looking the way I want it to? And you sit there and tweak and tweak and tweak, and it's not there. And then there's the other way around. There's the other way around where you sit somewhere and think, well, let's do this transmission rust shader. I think that will take a long, long time. And then you like for other people, half a day of shading work is a long time. Don't get me wrong, but like sometimes I tweak for 2 days or something, or 3 days. But yeah, like it was kind of an happy accident. I tweaked, and then I suddenly, wow, that looks better than expected.
Well, on the topic of happy accidents, I'm going to call you the Bob Ross of 3D. Just going around, just going around.
Just make a little happy moss there.
Little happy rust there.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, I will call it there at 7:30, because we have had a wonderful conversation, and I cannot thank you enough for wanting to sit down and spend time with me. And I hope this isn't the last time either. If you would be happy to speak to me again, I would absolutely love that.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I'm not sure how much people will take away from this, because I diverge from topics quite a bit, and I'm not sure if I even answered half of your questions, but here we are. We will see if people will like that.
If you're anything like me, I absolutely loved that conversation. For understanding his process for learning Octane, how he shares his knowledge, and how he keeps up to date in an incredibly fast-changing industry. I can't thank Raphael enough for being so generous with his time, and I really hope you enjoyed watching. Thank you so much, and I'll see you on the next one.